The first impression of Earth wasn't what the alien students had expected. They came from peaceful, highly advanced civilizations, each boasting technologies far beyond anything Earth could even imagine. Their world's reliance on AI, robots, and energy-based weapons made them feel invincible. Now, they were being sent on a special assignment, an educational exchange program to study the history of Earth's combat techniques. Aboard sleek, cloaked ships, they entered Earth's atmosphere with little fanfare. Their cloaking devices made them invisible to human eyes as they hovered high above the planet's surface, taking in the view of a world that seemed so primitive to them. The aliens came from different species, each with its own set of impressive attributes. The Orcs, a race that controlled gravity, the Xalethians, who had perfected the art of invisibility, and the Drexel, who could communicate telepathically and wield immense mental power. To them, the idea that this underdeveloped world would have anything significant to teach was laughable. As their ships slowly descended, one alien student, Zorith, an Araxian, turned to her companions, her voice filled with skepticism. "I can't believe the Galactic Council is sending us here. We have nothing to learn from these Earthlings. Their species survived because of luck, not intelligence. I can't imagine anything here worth our time." Her words echoed through the silent command center of their ship, and the rest of the students murmured in agreement. They saw humanity as a primitive race, always struggling to survive in a galaxy filled with far more advanced beings. The idea that humans had ever been a serious threat was beyond their comprehension. And yet, here they were, tasked with studying humanity's history. Their first destination was a military base. Earth had decided that the alien students would be guided by a human historian, Professor Bonner, who would show them Earth's violent past and its various combat strategies. As they landed, the alien students found themselves face to face with a military force, much smaller than those they were accustomed to. But the humans didn't seem scared or weak. On the contrary, they stood proud. The soldiers, though few in number, were armed with old-fashioned rifles and weapons. Yet there was something about the way they carried themselves that caught the aliens off guard. "Welcome to Earth," Professor Bonner greeted, his eyes sharp and focused, like a man who had seen the worst of what the world could offer. "I'm here to show you why humans are a force to be reckoned with. You may think you've seen it all, but what you're about to witness is something you can't find in any of your books or simulations." The alien students exchanged glances, their doubts written all over their faces. How could these humans possibly show them anything new? Professor Bonner didn't waste time. He immediately launched into the first lesson: the Great World Wars. The aliens were shown images and videos of wars that had taken place centuries ago, long before humanity even began to touch the stars. They saw soldiers on both sides fighting with primitive weapons, rifles, bayonets, and even swords. The battles were ugly, brutal, and bloody, and to the alien students, it seemed impossible that anyone could survive, let alone triumph, in such chaos. But as the lesson continued, something unexpected happened. They began to realize that humans had survived these wars not because of their advanced technology, but because of their sheer resourcefulness. Despite facing enemies with greater numbers, superior weapons, and technology, humans fought with cunning, strategy, and heart. The alien students, who had always relied on their own superior technology to solve problems, couldn't understand how humans, with their rudimentary tools, could even hope to survive. As Professor Bonner showed them more footage, the aliens saw that humans were able to adapt in ways their species never could. They learned how to make use of limited resources, create decoys, and stage ambushes that turned the tide of battles. They watched as ordinary men and women, facing insurmountable odds, fought to defend their homes, their families, and their way of life. One of the alien students, Alicia, an emotionless Xalethian, struggled to hold back a growing sense of awe. She had always believed that combat was only won through technological superiority and the use of AI-driven tactics. The idea that humans had won battles not through force, but through their determination, began to gnaw at her. How could they have done this? She muttered. How could they possibly survive against such overwhelming forces? Zorith, still skeptical, shook her head. They must have been lucky. This is not a battle I would have fought in. Their strategy is inefficient, yet even she couldn't deny the unsettling truth. Despite the primitive tools humans had used, they always seemed to find a way to win. The aliens were not accustomed to seeing such resilience from a species so technologically inferior. Professor Bonner continued, showing them more examples of human ingenuity in battle. From close-quarters combat where soldiers had to use hand-to-hand fighting, to orbital bombardments that could turn the tide of a planetary conflict, each example made the alien students question their own assumptions. They had been taught that superior technology made one unbeatable, but here was proof that it wasn't always the case. The footage shifted to World War II, a period of intense global conflict that had shaped the course of human history. The alien students were shown how a small band of human resistance fighters in occupied Europe used stealth tactics to sabotage supply lines, disrupt enemy communications, and slow down superior armies. They were also shown the heroics of soldiers who, even when all seemed lost, fought bravely to protect their comrades. Private James Riley, who had been outnumbered and outgunned, but managed to single-handedly take down an entire machine gun nest, was highlighted as a symbol of humanity's ability to overcome any obstacle. The room was silent as the alien students processed what they were seeing. Zorith couldn't help but feel a deep sense of respect for these Earthlings. Despite their apparent weakness, they had an unyielding spirit that no amount of technology could replace. Professor Bonner paused the simulation and turned to face the group. This is what humanity is capable of. No matter the enemy, no matter the odds, humans will fight to the last breath to defend what they believe in. And that's something none of your species has yet to understand. The alien students were speechless. They had come to Earth expecting to find nothing more than a primitive world, but what they found was far more complex. Their assumptions were crumbling, and in their place, a deep sense of curiosity and respect for humanity began to grow. Zorith, who had once believed that Earth was nothing more than a weak, forgotten planet in the galaxy, now saw it in an entirely new light. Perhaps there is more to these humans than we realized, she admitted quietly. But there was still a lingering question in the back of their minds. Could these humans truly be capable of standing up to the advanced civilizations of the galaxy? Was their will to survive strong enough to compete with species like theirs, who controlled entire star systems? As the lesson came to an end, Professor Bonner looked out at the students. You've seen Earth's history. Tomorrow, I'll show you how that history lives on today. The alien students exchanged uncertain glances. Earth had stunned them, but there was still so much more to learn. And something told them that the next lesson would reveal even greater surprises. The next day, the alien students gathered in the same room, their minds still reeling from the events of the previous day. The knowledge they had gained about Earth's violent history had left them unsettled. It was one thing to hear of human struggles, but it was another to witness the relentless bravery of humanity in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. As they stood there, looking at Professor Bonner, their anticipation was mixed with a hint of apprehension. What could they learn today that would further challenge their assumptions? Professor Bonner wasted no time. His voice was steady and commanding as he began the next lesson. Yesterday, we discussed the Great World Wars and how humanity fought to survive. Today, we'll focus on how these events shaped the world you see around you, and the lessons Earthlings took from them. But more importantly, we'll look at how the same spirit of resistance and innovation still drives humanity today. He gestured to the large screen in front of them, and the students saw images flash on the screen. These were images of Earth's most famous battles: the Battle of Stalingrad, D-Day, and the Battle of Midway. The alien students were shocked at what they saw. The human soldiers, armed with outdated rifles and grenades, stood firm against forces far superior in number and weaponry. What surprised the alien students the most, however, was how outnumbered and outgunned these human soldiers were. The footage showed the sheer willpower these soldiers had, fighting for survival, even when it seemed impossible. Professor Bonner explained the context. Stalingrad was one of the most brutal battles of World War II. The Germans, with their advanced technology, thought they could easily take control of the city. But the Russian soldiers, supported by civilians, fought with a determination that even the best technology couldn't overcome. It was a battle of attrition, where the human spirit was the key to victory. Humans never give up, no matter the cost. This is something no alien species has truly understood. Zorith, the Araxian, could hardly believe it. The idea of fighting a battle of such magnitude without overwhelming technological superiority seemed foreign to her. But how did they survive? How did they win against such advanced weaponry? Professor Bonner smiled, a hint of pride in his voice. That's what makes humans different. In times of desperation, they adapt. They learn from their mistakes and turn them into strengths. In Stalingrad, the soldiers had no choice but to adapt. They used the city's ruins as cover, turning every street, every building into a fortress. They created traps and used the harsh winter to their advantage. They didn't have the best weapons, but they had the will to survive. The aliens were stunned. They had never encountered a species so willing to sacrifice everything for survival. They couldn't fathom how these humans, so small and so seemingly fragile, could show such resilience. Elijah, the Zalathian, spoke for the first time in a long while, her voice filled with awe. I thought we were the most adaptable species in the galaxy, but these humans, they don't just adapt, they thrive in situations where others would fail. As the lesson continued, the students were shown more examples of human innovation in warfare. The D-Day landings, where thousands of soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy, seemed like something out of a sci-fi movie. The aliens had read about the use of amphibious vehicles, bombs, and machine guns in war, but seeing the human soldiers in action, charging through gunfire and explosions, left them speechless. The footage showed the brutality of the battle, with soldiers falling under the onslaught of enemy fire. But what stood out to the alien students was the tactics and coordination that the humans used. Despite being faced with overwhelming enemy fire, they fought in coordinated groups, constantly adjusting their strategy to counter the ever-changing battlefield. The idea of human soldiers working together, despite being outnumbered and under-equipped, was a new concept for the aliens. Elijah's eyes widened as she watched the landing unfold. How did they manage to fight so bravely, knowing that they could die at any moment? Professor Bonner's voice softened, because they knew it wasn't just about them. It was about their families, their homes, and their freedom. They fought not just for themselves, but for everyone they loved. That is why they are a force to be reckoned with. The alien students were quiet, absorbing the magnitude of what they had just seen. These humans fought, not for conquest or glory, but for something more powerful, a sense of purpose. They weren't driven by fear or greed. They fought for the survival of their people, for the ideals they believed in. This was something the alien students couldn't easily grasp. Their species, with their superior technology and deep knowledge of the galaxy, had never faced such selflessness in battle. The footage shifted to a more recent battle, the Battle of Midway, where human naval forces had managed to defeat the mighty Imperial Japanese Navy during World War II. Despite being outgunned and outnumbered, the humans had relied on intelligence, strategy, and resourcefulness to turn the tide. The aliens watched as human pilots, with their crude planes, engaged in intense aerial dogfights. It was a battle of wits, and the humans came out victorious, despite all odds. Zorith shook her head in disbelief. How did they do this? Their technology is so inferior, and yet they managed to win. Professor Bonner's eyes gleamed with pride. Because humans don't fight just with weapons. They fight with their hearts, with their minds. They are resourceful in ways you can't imagine. and they're willing to sacrifice everything for the greater good. The alien students had always believed that victory in war was determined by the power of technology. But as they witnessed these human victories, something deep inside them began to shift. They started to realize that technology, no matter how advanced, could never replace the human spirit. Bravery, sacrifice, and innovation were just as important, if not more so. The lesson continued with examples of modern warfare, where humanity faced new threats, from rogue nations to cyber warfare. They saw how humans used their intelligence to outsmart enemies who had far superior resources. Professor Bonner explained how Earth's military had adapted to the changing landscape of war, using everything from drones to cyber attacks to outwit technologically advanced opponents. The alien students were captivated. They had never thought of war in such a human-centric way. The more they learned, the more they realized how little they understood about the species they had once underestimated. But it wasn't just the humans' bravery or adaptability that stunned them. It was the way humans never gave up, no matter how impossible the situation seemed. Even when all seemed lost, humans found a way to keep fighting, to keep pushing forward. They didn't fight for honor or glory, but for the survival of their kind, for their loved ones, and for the future of their world. As the lesson ended, the alien students sat in silence, their minds buzzing with new information. They had come to Earth expecting to find a weak, primitive species, but what they found was a species that had faced unimaginable odds and survived through sheer determination. Humanity, they now realized, was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. And as they left the room, they couldn't help but feel a growing respect for the humans who had fought so valiantly to protect their world. They weren't just students of Earth's history anymore. They were witnesses to the strength and resilience of a species that had survived and thrived, against all odds. The day after their intense lesson on Earth's combat history, the alien students found themselves in the same room once again. Their minds were still trying to process the shocking information they had learned about humanity's past struggles. It wasn't just the bravery of human soldiers that had taken them by surprise, but the sheer willpower and resourcefulness that humans had shown in the face of overwhelming odds. It was almost as if the lesson had changed the way they viewed humans forever. But now, Professor Bonner had something else planned for them. A simulation test to truly put their newfound understanding of humanity's combat spirit to the test. As the students took their seats, they exchanged curious looks. They had seen the videos, heard the stories, but now they were going to experience something different. This wasn't just a lesson in history. It was an opportunity to feel what it was like to be in the shoes of a human soldier. Professor Bonner stood at the front of the room, a serious expression on his face. Today, we'll test your understanding of human combat tactics. You'll participate in a simulation that will challenge everything you've learned so far. It will not be easy, and I expect you to give it your best effort. The students' expressions shifted. Some of them looked nervous, while others seemed intrigued. Zorith, the Araxian, clenched her fists. She had always been confident in her combat abilities, and she was eager to see how her species would fare against the challenges humanity had faced. Elysia led the civilians out of the building, guiding them through the chaos with careful precision. She used her speed and agility to navigate through the burning ruins, ensuring that no one was left behind. The experience taught her that the true strength of a soldier was not just in their combat skills, but in their ability to protect and lead those who couldn't defend themselves. Callan's scenario was no less challenging. He was deep in a dense forest, searching for a trapped soldier who had been separated from the rest of their unit. The soldier was injured, and the terrain was difficult. It seemed like an impossible mission, but Callan wasn't about to give up. He called for help, but the enemy was closing in. The clock was ticking. Callan knew that, just like the human soldiers he had learned about, he couldn't afford to waste time. He had to move quickly and think creatively. Using his advanced technology, Callan was able to locate the soldier's position, but getting there would be no easy task. The forest was dense, and the enemy was all around. Callan moved carefully, using the environment to his advantage. He moved silently, making use of every tree, rock, and shadow to conceal his presence. As he reached the trapped soldier, he found that the soldier was in worse shape than he had anticipated. But just as he was about to carry the soldier to safety, a group of enemy soldiers appeared. It was a close-quarters fight, and Kalen had to think fast. He used his advanced combat techniques to overpower the enemy soldiers, all while making sure the injured soldier was safe. It wasn't the most elegant victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. As the simulation ended, Kalen breathed a sigh of relief. He had learned the importance of quick thinking, adaptation, and determination. Like the human soldiers he had learned about, Kalen understood that sometimes the key to survival was doing whatever it took to get the job done. After the simulation, the students gathered to discuss their experiences. Each of them had learned something new, something that human soldiers had perfected over centuries of conflict. They had seen firsthand the power of the human spirit and the importance of adaptability, strategy, and sacrifice. Zorth spoke first. "I never understood what made humans so dangerous. But now, I see it. It's not their weapons or technology. It's their refusal to give up, no matter the odds." Elijah nodded in agreement. They fight for something greater than themselves. They fight for their people, for their homes, for their future. Kalen's voice was steady as he added, "And they're not afraid to make sacrifices, even when the situation seems hopeless." Professor Bonner smiled. "Exactly. Now you understand why humans have survived against all odds. It's not their weapons that make them dangerous. It's their will to win, no matter the cost." The alien students left the simulation room that day with a newfound respect for humanity. They had come to Earth thinking that humans were weak, primitive creatures, but now they knew the truth. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its technology, it was in its heart. The day after the simulation, the alien students found themselves in the same classroom, but this time, their faces were different. They were quieter, more thoughtful, as if something had shifted in their understanding of humanity. What they had learned in the simulation wasn't just about the technical aspects of human combat. It had opened their eyes to something deeper, something far more profound. It wasn't about the weapons humans wielded or the technology they used. It was something within them that set them apart from every other species in the galaxy. It was their spirit. "Do not underestimate the human spirit," Bonner warned, his voice firm. "This simulation will show you that while your advanced technology and tactics are impressive, it is the human heart that ultimately determines the outcome of a battle." The students were led into a large, darkened room with a holographic display in the center. As they stepped inside, they saw that the room had been transformed into a battlefield, a replica of an Earth city, with ruins, streets, and buildings scattered around. It was a war zone, and the simulation was about to begin. "You will each face a different scenario," Bonner explained. "Some of you will fight in the streets, while others will be in close-quarters combat. Some will be outnumbered, while others will have superior technology. The key is not just to survive, but to adapt. Just as humans have done throughout their history, you must use your surroundings and your wits to win." The aliens were briefed on their roles. Zorth was chosen to lead a small team of soldiers who would have to hold a position in the midst of an enemy assault. Elijah, the Zalathian, was tasked with defending a civilian group in an urban environment, and Kalen, the Tharkshian, was to rescue a trapped soldier in a dense forest. "Remember," Bonner said as he gave them their instructions, "the goal is not to simply win. It's to understand what makes humanity unique in battle, how they fight, adapt, and overcome. Keep that in mind." The simulation began. The room shifted, and the alien students were suddenly immersed in their chosen scenarios. Zorth found herself in the heart of a ruined city, crouching behind a broken wall. Her team was spread out, their weapons drawn, ready to defend their position from an enemy force that was closing in. The sound of distant explosions and gunfire echoed through the city. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and burning debris. Zorth surveyed the scene, analyzing her surroundings. The human soldiers, she had learned, often used the environment to their advantage. They didn't wait for the perfect conditions to strike. They created their own advantage. With that in mind, she barked orders to her team, directing them to take cover and create a series of traps to slow the enemy's advance. Just as the enemy approached, Zorith's team opened fire, their weapons blasting away at the advancing forces. But the enemy was relentless. They had superior numbers and firepower, and soon Zorith's team was pinned down. It was a test of tactics and coordination. Zorith realized that their technology might be advanced, but they didn't have the resilience of the human soldiers. They couldn't just wait for the enemy to make a mistake. They had to fight with everything they had. In the midst of the battle, Zorith made a decision. She called for a counterattack, leading her team in a desperate charge through the smoke and ruins. They moved swiftly, using the debris as cover, and attacked the enemy from multiple angles. It wasn't the most organized assault, but it was effective. They created confusion and panic in the enemy's ranks, forcing them to retreat. As the simulation ended, Zorith's heart was racing. She had learned a valuable lesson. Victory wasn't just about having the most advanced weapons. It was about adaptability and fighting smart. The human soldiers had relied on these very principles to survive their own battles. She had seen it firsthand, and now she understood why they had been so effective in war. Meanwhile, Elysia found herself in a different scenario. She was surrounded by a group of civilians, trapped in a burning building. The enemy was closing in, and Elysia's task was to protect the civilians while also finding a way to escape. The odds were against her, and the situation felt hopeless. The civilians were terrified, and Elysia had no choice but to take charge. At first, she hesitated. She was a warrior, trained for battle, not for protecting civilians. But as the simulation progressed, she realized that the human soldiers had faced situations like this before. They had been forced to protect their families, their homes, with nothing but their courage and determination. It was then that Elysia understood. Protection wasn't just about physical strength. It was about duty. Professor Bonner observed them closely as they gathered. He knew what had happened. The simulation had done its job. It had shown them what humanity truly was, not just through lessons and stories, but through first-hand experience. The students now understood what the word resilience meant. Zorith, the Araxian, sat at her desk, still replaying the events of the simulation in her mind. She had been in charge of holding a position, and though her team had superior technology and firepower, they had been overwhelmed. In the end, it was her decision to lead a counterattack, an instinctive move that wasn't about calculation but about fighting for survival. She realized that in the human military's darkest moments, soldiers did not simply give up. They adapted. They improvised. They fought with everything they had. Zorith had always been confident in her own abilities, but the human's unrelenting will to win, even against the odds, had shaken her. She had seen it in the history books. The stories of humans outnumbered, their cities burning, their armies decimated, but they kept coming back. No matter how hard they were pushed, they didn't bend. They fought on, determined to win or die trying. Zorith had understood the theory of human resilience, but the simulation had made her feel it. Elysia, the Zalathian, was also reflecting on the events. She had been in a completely different scenario. Her task had been to protect civilians in a burning building while under siege by enemy forces. She wasn't just a soldier. She was a protector, a guide for those who couldn't defend themselves. At first, she hadn't known how to react. She was trained to fight, not to shield the weak. But as she had led the civilians through the chaos, something inside her clicked. She saw the human soldiers' stories in a new light. Their sacrifice wasn't just about defending themselves. It was about defending those who couldn't fight back. In the final moments of the simulation, Elysia had led a group of civilians out of the building just as it was about to collapse. Her heart pounded in her chest as she guided them through the smoke-filled streets. Her thoughts focused only on their safety. The human she had learned about had faced battles just like this one. They had fought for their homes, their families, their future. And in that moment, Elysia realized that the true strength of humanity was in their commitment to others, even when it seemed hopeless. Kalen, the Tharxian, had been tasked with rescuing a trapped soldier deep in the forest. Unlike the others, Kalen's mission wasn't about protecting civilians or holding a position. It was about rescue. The soldier had been separated from their unit and was badly injured. Kalen had faced countless dangers along the way, and with every step, he had come to understand the lesson humanity had to teach: persistence. The forest had been dense and dark, with the enemy closing in from all sides. At first, Kalen had relied on his advanced technology to locate the trapped soldier, but as the battle grew more intense, he realized that technology alone wasn't enough. He needed to think like a human soldier. He needed to adapt to the situation. It wasn't about the most advanced gadgets. It was about making use of what he had, whether it was the terrain, his environment, or his instincts. Kalen had gotten to the soldier, but by the time he reached them, the enemy was only a few meters away. It had been a close-quarters fight. With only his hand-to-hand combat skills and a few basic tools, Kalen had managed to escape, carrying the injured soldier with him through the dense woods. It hadn't been an easy victory, and it had cost him valuable time. But he did it. He understood now that the key to surviving in battle wasn't just strength. It was resourcefulness. Human soldiers, as he had learned, were masters of improvisation. They could take the smallest opportunity and turn it into an advantage. After the simulation, the students gathered again, this time with a sense of quiet reflection. They were no longer discussing strategies or tactics. Instead, they were talking about what they had experienced. The sense of awe in their voices was unmistakable. Zorith was the first to speak up. "I used to think humans were just primitive," she said, her voice tinged with respect. "We thought they were weak because they didn't have the technology we have. But now, after what we saw, I realize we were wrong. It's not about the weapons or the technology. It's about how they fight. It's about their willpower, their drive to never give up." Elysia nodded, adding, "I understand now. Humans fight for something bigger than themselves. They fight to protect others, to defend their homes, their families. We were just focused on fighting for victory. But humans, they fight to preserve life." Kalen looked down, thinking about the simulation. "I used to think that technology would give us the edge in any fight," he said slowly. "But the humans, they're different. They don't need the best tools to win. They make the best of what they have, and that's what makes them dangerous." Professor Bonner, who had been listening quietly, smiled. "Exactly. You've all learned something that many races in the galaxy never understand. Human strength isn't just physical. It's emotional. It's mental. It's about never accepting defeat, even when all seems lost. That's what makes them so dangerous. It's why, despite their limited resources, they've survived against enemies far stronger than them." Zorith leaned forward, a new understanding in her eyes. "So, it's not just the technology. It's the heart. That's what makes humans different. They fight not because they want to win, but because they have something to protect." "Exactly," Bonner said, his voice filled with pride. "Humanity doesn't just survive. They persist. They endure, and that is something no weapon or piece of technology can ever replicate." The students sat in silence for a moment, contemplating what they had learned. They had come to Earth thinking they were here to study a primitive species, one whose combat history would be easy to dismiss. But now they understood that humanity's true strength was far beyond anything they had expected. It wasn't about weapons. It wasn't about technology. It was about the human spirit, an indomitable force that couldn't be crushed, no matter how strong the enemy. As the day drew to a close, Zorith looked out at the horizon, her mind still processing everything she had learned. She had seen humanity's battles, felt their struggles, and understood their sacrifices. And she couldn't help but feel a deep respect for the human race. They had faced impossible odds time and time again, and they had never once backed down. In the end, it wasn't the advanced alien forces that made humanity powerful. It was their ability to rise above, to fight with every ounce of their being for what they believed in. And that was something the alien students would never forget. The alien students sat in stunned silence as the final simulation concluded. The exercise had been grueling, and for the first time, they began to fully grasp the complexities of Earth's combat history. But they were about to be shown something far more significant, something that would shake their beliefs to the core. The simulation had been one thing, but what they were about to learn was real history. The story of Earth's last stand. Professor Bonner could sense the tension in the air. The room was thick with anticipation as he prepared to reveal the next part of the lesson. The students had already seen the relentless nature of humanity in battle, but now they would learn about the final stand, the battle that defined the future of Earth and its people. For the past few days, you've learned about human resilience and adaptability. Bonner began, his voice calm but carrying an underlying weight. But now you will understand what it means to face the end. The battle for Earth's survival was not just a military fight. It was a fight for the very essence of what it means to be human. The students looked at each other, their faces filled with confusion and curiosity. They had heard stories of humanity's wars, but none had prepared them for the horrors that had unfolded during Earth's last stand. The story Bonner was about to tell would change everything they thought they knew about humans. As the lights dimmed and the room was filled with a soft hum, an image flickered onto the large screen. The scene was chaotic. Earth, once a thriving hub of human civilization, was now reduced to a war-torn planet. Cities were burning, and the skies were filled with smoke and ash. The alien invaders, a powerful coalition of technologically advanced species, had arrived with one purpose: to wipe humanity from existence. The battle had been fierce, and Earth's military had fought valiantly. But the invaders had superior technology, overwhelming numbers, and no mercy. The first wave of the invasion had been devastating. Entire cities were obliterated in moments, the remnants of once great civilizations reduced to rubble. The human forces, though fierce and determined, were quickly outmatched. Weapons of unimaginable power were unleashed on Earth's defenses. The invaders had cloaking technology, allowing them to strike without warning, leaving humanity vulnerable. But what the alien students didn't know was that the humans hadn't given up. Despite the destruction, the slaughter, and the hopelessness of the situation, they fought on. Bonner continued, his voice heavy with the weight of the past. The first wave of invasion left Earth shattered. But humanity is not a species that surrenders. Even in the face of annihilation, they continued to resist. The survivors gathered in hidden underground bunkers, cities that had been untouched by the initial assault. They'd rebuilt their forces, not with advanced weapons, but with determination. They found ways to fight back, even when it seemed like all was lost. The students were transfixed by the images on the screen. They watched as human soldiers, battered and bruised, emerged from their hiding places and began to reclaim their cities. It was not easy, and the toll was enormous. But the humans refused to be broken. What did they do next? Zorith, the Araxian, asked, her voice filled with awe. How could they possibly survive against such overwhelming force? Bonner looked at her, his expression grim. They did something no one expected. They united. Despite their differences, despite the many factions and nations that had once been divided, the human race came together for one cause: survival. Their military leaders, civilians, and scientists worked side by side. They developed new tactics, often relying on unconventional warfare. The image on the screen shifted. Now, the students saw humans using guerrilla tactics, ambushing invaders, sabotaging their equipment, and launching surprise attacks. They saw soldiers armed with basic weapons taking down advanced alien machinery. Humans were even using their own cities as weapons, luring invaders into traps by manipulating the terrain. The resistance was small at first, but it grew with each victory. Elysia, the Zalathian, spoke quietly. This is impossible. How could they fight against technology like that? With only simple weapons. Bonner nodded. That's the strength of humanity. They don't rely on technology alone. They rely on their ingenuity, their resourcefulness, and above all, their will to survive. When they were pushed to the edge, they did what no other species could. They adapted. They didn't wait for help. They created their own solutions. The screen flickered again, showing images of Earth's last stand. The invaders, sensing that humanity's resistance was growing stronger, launched their final assault. A massive orbital bombardment designed to annihilate Earth's remaining defenses once and for all. The bombardment was swift, and cities were again reduced to ashes. For many, it seemed like the end was inevitable. But once again, humanity refused to back down. They knew they couldn't match the invaders' firepower head-on, so they devised a bold, desperate plan. Using a cloaking device, a technology they had scavenged from the invaders themselves, they managed to infiltrate the invaders' mothership, the Central Command Vessel. A small group of elite human soldiers, trained for this kind of mission, snuck aboard the ship. Their goal was to take out the ship's central core, the source of its power. Now that you've seen the war, the battle for survival, and humanity's final stand, Bonner began, his voice calm but heavy. It's time to understand what came next. Victory doesn't come without its consequences. The Earth that humans fought so hard to protect was changed forever. And in the aftermath, they had to rebuild not just their cities, but their very way of life. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the realization of the cost of war beginning to settle in. The images on the screen flickered to life again, showing the aftermath of Earth's last stand. The destruction was staggering. Once thriving cities were now reduced to smoldering ruins, their skeletal remains rising from the ground like ghosts of a forgotten world. The landscape was scarred, with craters from the orbital bombardment, shattered infrastructure, and the remains of once advanced technology now lying in pieces. But what struck the students the most was the sight of humanity's spirit. Even in the face of such devastation, they were rebuilding. We saw the final battle, the triumph of humanity over an overwhelming enemy, Bonner continued. But that victory came at a cost. There were no celebrations, no joyous feasts. The survivors were left to mourn the loss of their loved ones, their homes, their way of life. But in the face of grief, they did not surrender. They rebuilt. The students watched as the footage shifted, showing groups of humans working together in the ruins. They saw families picking up the pieces, rebuilding their homes with the remnants of the destroyed cities. They saw soldiers helping civilians, not just in combat, but in the recovery effort. There were engineers working tirelessly to restore power, scientists helping to clean the air and water, and even the elderly and children contributing in whatever way they could. It wasn't easy, Bonner said, his voice soft but filled with conviction. The physical destruction was only one part of the challenge. The emotional toll was far greater. Many lost loved ones, entire communities, even entire families. And yet, through the pain, humanity found something remarkable. They found respect for each other. The students watched as humans, who had once been divided by borders, ideologies, and even wars of their own, came together to form a united front. There were no longer any divisions. The focus was on survival and rebuilding, and it didn't matter where someone had come from or what they had believed in before. What mattered was that they were all human, and they were all in this together. The human race was fractured before the war, Bonner explained. But after the war, they learned to respect each other. They set aside old grudges and focused on a single unifying goal: to rebuild and ensure that the future generations would never face such a war again. The loss of their cities, their loved ones, their homes, it was all devastating. But they learned that respect for each other, for their differences, was the key to surviving what came next. The footage continued, showing humanity's efforts to rebuild their governments and societies. Leaders who had once been fierce rivals now worked side by side. Countries that had fought for control now offered each other help. The alien students couldn't believe what they were seeing. Unity was something they had never witnessed before in a species. They had seen Earth as a chaotic, divided world. But now they saw a different side of humanity, a side built on mutual respect, collaboration, and the understanding that only together could they ensure the survival of their species. Zorith, the Araxian, spoke first, her voice trembling with emotion. They didn't just fight for survival. They fought for each other. They didn't let their past divide them. Bonner nodded. Exactly. They realized that their greatest strength wasn't in their technology, or their military might, or their weapons. It was in their humanity, their ability to come together and heal. The respect they found for each other was the true victory of the war. The students sat in silence, processing the profound transformation humanity had undergone. They had come to Earth to learn about a primitive species, but now they were witnessing a powerful lesson in the power of unity, resilience, and respect. The war was over, but the recovery was just beginning. And in that recovery, humanity had learned something that no other species had been able to teach them, that even in the darkest of times, there was light to be found in the strength of community. Bonner continued, but the journey wasn't over. While the humans rebuilt their world, they also had to face the responsibility of the war's aftermath. They had lost many of their finest soldiers, leaders, and citizens. The cost of victory was something they would carry with them for generations. They honored the fallen, not just with memorials and statues, but with actions, ensuring that their sacrifices weren't in vain. The screen shifted again, showing memorial services for the fallen soldiers. The students saw human families, soldiers and civilians alike, gathered in solemn ceremonies to pay tribute to those who had given their lives. The pain was still fresh, but there was a quiet dignity in the way humanity honored their dead. The alien students could see the deep sense of loss in their eyes, but they also saw something else, a respect for the fallen that transcended mere mourning. It was a respect that was felt in the very core of the human spirit, and it was this respect that drove the rebuilding effort. Human cities began to rise again, not just from the rubble, but from the shared desire to honor those who had given everything. The alien students watched as the people of Earth worked not for themselves, but for the legacy of those who had fought and died. The respect humans have for each other and for those who came before them is profound, Bonner said, his voice heavy with respect. They don't forget the sacrifices made. They honor them in everything they do, ensuring that their future is better than the past. The students were silent, their minds racing. They had come to Earth expecting to study a simple, primitive species, but instead they had witnessed the incredible strength and resilience of humanity. They had learned about the cost of war, the sacrifice of those who fought, and the respect that humans had earned through their suffering and their survival. And as they sat there, they realized something. Humanity, in all its flaws and imperfections, was a species that had earned the right to be respected. They had faced impossible odds, and they had won. But it wasn't just their military strength that made them worthy of respect. It was their humanity, their ability to come together in the face of overwhelming adversity, to rebuild, and to honor the past while fighting for a better future. The alien students now understood. They had come to Earth to study combat history, but they had learned much more. They had learned that true strength was not in the weapons one wielded, but in the spirit of the people who fought for something greater than themselves. And that was a lesson that would stay with them forever.